To get started on this exercise, you should download the Tonal Practice JPEG from the class website, and we're going to open this up in Photoshop. So simply dragging it in will automatically create a document the size and proportions that we're going to use for this exercise. Just make sure you can see the entire document. Also for this one, make sure you've got access to your Layers panel because we're going to be using this to set up your document and do all your drawing. Inside of your layers, we've got our background layer. We're going to keep it locked down. We're going to make a new layer, double click on it and call it your drawing layer. And all of the work that we're going to do is just going to be done in this drawing layer. In addition to this, the tools that we're going to use are going to be found in your toolbox, and we're going to primarily work with your pencil tool. The pencil tool works just like the brush tool. However, when you have it selected, you can go up to the very top. You can pick and choose the size and hardness of your brush, but it will always remain a hard-edged brush. In other words, there is no soft values that you can create with it. We're also going to be working with the general brushes, so make sure you can find this folder, but be aware that there's different kinds of general brushes. Some of them are pressure sensitive for the size or the opacity, and some are just have pressure sensitivity turned off. Make sure you can read the name of it so you know which one you're clicking on. Later on, we're also going to be using the legacy brushes. Now by default, you can see the legacy brushes aren't added to my brush set. So to add your legacy brushes, go up to the little cogwheel under the drop-down menu and choose Legacy Brushes. This may give you a warning saying OK to that. Now when you click on the drop-down menu, you can see these legacy brushes have been added to your brush set that you can pick and choose from. In addition to this, for this exercise, we're going to keep the Pencil Tool's drawing node set to normal with 100% opacity. And for now, we're going to keep the smoothing low and also keep the pressure sensitivity turned off for both of those. So make sure both of those are unchecked. Let's jump in now and work through each of these different parts on drawing with the pencil brush. The first thing we want to do is practice painting some tonal values from darkest, pure black, to lightest, pure white. We also want to stay within each of the columns. So the first tool I'm going to choose is my rectangular marquee tool. With this tool, I'm going to click and drag and simply select the entire first column. And whenever we do any painting, this will be done inside of just this area. Also make sure you've got your drawing layer selected. I'm going to choose my pencil tool. Now the size of our brush really doesn't matter or to be specific, but I'm going to keep a brush size around 75 to 80 pixels. Again, we're working in normal drawing mode. The next thing I want to do is I want to be able to pick up the colors that are adjacent to each of the little squares. To do this, I'm going to hold down my Option key. When I do, you can see my pencil turns into the eyedropper, and then I can select that particular tone. I'm then going to paint in that square that's right next to that tone. Now if yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. Later on we're going to go back and clean this up. So holding down Option, I'm going to pick up this tone and paint in there. Initially it's not going to show too much change, but we're stepping down values about 10% each time. So holding down Option and painting it in, and just repeat this process to go all the way up to the topmost value. Now that we've got this done, let's go back in and do some of the in-between values. As we've done before, hold down the Option key, and you can see where the two values meet. We can click on that part, and then we can go back in and paint in between both of those. Hold down Option, click, and right where they meet, we can go back and forth. And you can see that it's going to be lighter than your most upper value and a little bit darker than your upper value, lighter than your lower value. So go through and give yourself some in-between values to clean up each one of these as well. All right, with these in-betweens done, that'll finish up the tonal value column. We can keep going and make it a perfectly smooth one, but I mainly wanted to show you how you can paint and select inside of a specific area. To deselect it, you can go up to Select and Deselect, and that'll get rid of your rectangular marquee. Now we can work on the stippled dots. As with the other one, we want to start with our rectangle marquee, and select just the second column. Click and drag over that. Also, we're going to choose our pencil tool, and we want to be able to work in different sized dots. Anywhere between 1 and 10 pixels will be a good one. A good keyboard shortcut to know to change the size of your brush on the fly is your bracket keys. Pressing the open and close bracket key will make it smaller or larger in 1 increments. So I've got mine set to 10 pixels, and I'm going to set my foreground color to a solid black. Now when I paint with solid black, initially it's just going to paint like a regular brush as a line. We want to be able to break this line up. To do this, click on the little brush with the folder icon at the top. This is going to open your brush settings folder. At the very top, you can click on Brush Tip Shape, and this will allow you to customize how your brush flows. What we want to do is to break up the spacing of it. So increase your spacing until you see the preview starts to pull it apart. Now the more spacing you give, the farther apart it's going to be spaced. So anywhere it looks like above 150 to anywhere up to 400 pixels or 400% is what we want to look for. With it spaced apart, you can now use your brush to paint as a stippled effect. So I can go over and over again, filling in the entire area until it gets a density of pixels. Now if I wanted, I can scatter these a little bit more as well. By clicking on Scattering and selecting the name, this will allow me to spread them apart and add a little bit more randomness to the design, as well as increase the count, so I can have more scattering about as well. So if I wanted to quickly fill in this lower area, I can do so through scattering. What I want to do is to fill in each area going from pure dark at the very bottom to getting lighter as it goes on up. So here it would be around this darkest value, but it's going to get lighter and lighter and less dense in pixels and stipples as it goes up as well. Now another way I can increase or decrease the density of my pixels is either by lowering my count and also, of course, scattering it out a little bit more. Choose brush tip options and increase my spacing. That'll make it a little bit easier to control the amount of stipples. And then finally, I can also change the size of my brush. Making my brush smaller will give me a smaller dot. That'll allow me to cover less area too. Now if you found that you have gone a little bit too dark in an area and you want to lighten it up, this is where you can swap your foreground color over to white, and you can go back and add white pixels on top of it. Since I'm painting with white on top of black, this is going to lighten up my area. And again, depending on the size and the spacing and the scattering, it's going to give you different results. But we're going to strive for doing a continuous tone from darkest to lightest up to the very top. Once you get a good tone finished, we can now go up to Select and deselect the area. And let's work through hatch lines. Again, I'm going to use my rectangular marquee to select the area. I'm going to choose my pencil tool. And I'm going to, again, go to my brush settings. If you need to open it, you can click on the little folder. Let's turn off scattering, and let's set our spacing all the way back down to 1%. This way, when I draw, I get a solid line. We also want to make sure that we're working just in a black mode. Now with our hatched lines, we want to have a special type of line that's real thin and it's also pressure sensitive. So I'm going to open up my general brushes, and this time I'm going to choose the hard, round, pressure sensitive size one. With this one, with pressure sensitivity turned on, it will adjust the size of my line thicker or thinner based on what I'm working with. I'm also going to set the size of my brush to be between 10 to 15, maybe even less, pixels. For now, I'll keep it at 10. Hatch lines work a lot like stippled dots, so that the density of the line is going to create the tone that we're working in. Now, unlike the others where the lines have to be spaced out, there's no automatic way of doing it in your brush settings. We just need to draw these lines over and over again. So we'll start off with the darkest ones, and I'm going to go in one direction, and I can make them closer together, or I can go in an opposite direction and hatch them on top of each other to add more density. The main thing is I'm keeping a nice consistent line. I'm getting used to drawing over and over in the same space. Later on, I'll go horizontal lines to add more density, and I can do vertical lines to add even more density. Again, repeating this process, lightening up the density as it goes all the way to the top from darkest to a lightest density. Again, if you find that you've gone too far, you've got an area that's a little bit too dark, swap over to white as your foreground color and then paint some white lines on top of it to hatch that and to push back that particular color. You also may want to adjust the size of your brush, making it larger or smaller, just to erase away or to cover up those lines. There. Once you've finished up, you can again go up to Select and deselect the area. And let's move through the textured pencil phase. We'll start by selecting the area using our rectangular marquee. Then choose your pencil brush. Now the tool that we want to use for this pencil is going to be found not in your general brushes, but open your legacy brushes. Locate the dry media brushes, and you can see there's a variety of different ones that give textures to how you paint. Let's play around with the first one, the flat blunt with texture. With this one selected, you can also open up the brush settings, and here's where we can play around with how this brush is going to look and feel on our page. Again, I've got black selected as my foreground color, and when I paint, you can see it picks up some texture as if I was painting with a real-world media. I can adjust the size of my brush up here, so naturally if I get a larger or smaller brush, it's going to cover a larger area. But I can also play around with the brush bristle qualities. Changing this up, it will drastically change how your brush is going to paint on your canvas, giving you more or less texture, more density, or less density. So depending on the style that you're going for, you could have a really thin area, changing the thickness of it, or you can have a really thick, bold area painting with this, and everything in between. So playing around with the settings is going to be one thing you can do to adjust the thickness and the density of your brush, as well as picking up the different tones. So as I paint, I want to be able to paint darkest down here. So I'm going to hold down and pick up black. I can do something really dense. And as I also paint, I've got pressure sensitivities turned on as well. So as I've got less pressure on this one, you can see it's just barely putting down a little bit of texture. Now it could get to the point where I need to change the tone as well. So I can hold down my Option key, pick up a lighter tone, and I can paint a lighter tone of texture on top of this. Again, we want to blend it, so holding down Option and picking up those colors and blending them together. You can see how the texture is starting to come through as well. So as I paint this one, this is a lighter tone, but a denser amount of texture, or I can do a denser texture or a darker tone. The main thing is I want to be able to see the texture as I paint and as I pick up each one going across with this. Take some time and fill in each of the areas and then try to go back and add blending in between each set as well. The final set will be a variety of hatched lines, but in this case it's going to be on a middle tone of gray. So I'm going to deselect my original column and let's select this far right column. With this one, we're going to be using hatched lines. So as we set up with the other one, let's choose a regular pencil tool. We'll go back to my general brushes. And in my case, I'm going to choose the pressure sensitive for size. And I'm going to set the size of it to be about 10 pixels. Whoops, make sure you're working at 100% opacity. Let's bring this down to about 10. That'll work for there. I do want to turn on pressure sensitivity, which is already turned on for this one, even though it doesn't show up here. Now, my medium tone is 50% gray. So as it gets lighter, I need to be able to paint white as my pencil strokes. So up here at the top, I'm going to paint white as pure white up at the top. And just like I've hatched before with the others, I want it to get darker and darker and less dense as it gets closer to the middle tone. So real quickly, I'm going to paint in a couple of these lines. It's going to be relatively dense up here at the top. Again, go in different directions and add different densities. If you find that you've gone too far and you need to darken it up, this again is where you can hold down your Option key, pick up that middle tone, and then go back in and repaint some other lines on top of it to further blend it in till it gets a nice smooth tone. So this is essentially like erasing away the white lines that you've created in order to add a little bit more tone value to that. Once we reach the middle tone, then we start to need to get darker. This is where we can swap over to black as our foreground color, and we can go from black to mid-tone of gray as well. So again, starting down here, I'll get really dense, going in one direction and then another direction to add density until I've filled in the entire area. And as we've done with the white lines, you can select the middle tone of gray and paint some gray lines over the dark ones if you need further blending and refining of these tones. Now, once you've finished creating all of the tones for each of the different techniques, let's go ahead and deselect our line. We'll go up to File, and let's do a Save As, and let's save this as a Photoshop file that you're going to upload to our class page.